Right, let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this.
We got this.
Let's do this. Welcome to DM Discretion. I'm Matt,
And I'm Sunny.
and we're from Cantrip Games. This is a show where we speak to DMs about how they do what they do behind the DM screen. Today, we're going to talk about house rules. Now, Sunny, key important question for all DMs: what are house rules?
So, house rules is when the DM does something or changes something that doesn't quite fit with the rules as written in the books. So, for example, maybe they want to change resting rules or crit rules or what have you, but they're making a change because it doesn't quite fit with the setting or the vibe or maybe the sort of particular goal they've created for themselves. Um,
Mhm.
that you add that extra level of customizability to games, and they can come from the DM or it can come from your players. Maybe it's
Mhm.
something they've put in place when they're building their character. Maybe they've had some funky idea and it doesn't quite fit the rules. So and it could be anything really. It can be something very cosmetic. Um, or just to add flair, or it could be like a main mechanic of the game that fundamentally changes maybe how something plays.
And on as part of that, essentially any house rule is essentially a way for us to expand upon that framework of the RPG. And so there's anything really that we're consistently ruling upon
Mm,
that we can say is we do it this way. This is the way we do it. This is the way I do it. Is a house rule.
mm.
Taking that mindset of I want to have house rules in my game. The the setting, the campaign, the RPG doesn't fit what I want to do. This doesn't quite fit. When would you look to implement these rules?
Yeah, so as I sort of mentioned before, you would do it when you feel that you just need that extra bit of tweak, because the rules is written doesn't doesn't quite fit what you're doing. Maybe you're not even doing a fantasy setting strictly.
Mhm.
Maybe you're doing something more modern day, or maybe you're doing something sci-fi. Say you still want, say you're doing a sci-fi setting and you're doing long swords. Well, maybe you just want everything to be an energy sword. So rather than it all dealing slashing or piercing jab damage, maybe it does radiant damage or force damage or what have you. And same thing with bows and crossbows and stuff, just to make them space lasers. Um, so again, it's like very minor, but you putting it into just tweaking it so it makes sense to what vibe you're going for. But then also you would do it when it generally either makes something make more sense or it makes something more fun and interesting.
Mhm.
Um, the counter to that is it's all well and good at being fun and interesting, but you have to weigh that against the effort it takes to remember, or or if applicable, track something.
Sure.
Um, because it's all well and good saying, oh, we're going to have this character have 20 different types of magic arrows. They've got fire ones and lightning ones and ice ones and stuff. And if you're going to implement that in, is it worth someone keeping on top of those?
Mhm.
Whether it's obviously the DM or the player or whoever, and what all those rules are as well. Because obviously, if you just say, "Oh, this arrow does this, this arrow does this, this arrow does this," someone has to remember that, and it's going to be the
Mhm.
DM. So it's like, is it worth it? Maybe you just go, "Well, that's a fire one; it does 1d6. That's a lightning 1d6, and so on and so forth." But then if you start going, "This creates a slimy residue that acts like the spell grease," and it's just like, oh, it's just
Mm.
like you just don't want to. It's a headache. Um,
That's true.
so that's kind of when you can push it too far.
Sure. Showing restraint is definitely a important factor of any DM.
Mm,
We can be very willing to say yes. Yes, and is a very common phrase we hear in role playing circles.
mm,
But knowing to say no, but is a sometimes a fair, responsible action to take
yeah.
as a result.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, you've always got to be really careful because you could get to a point where you're adding so many house rules that you're almost butchering the system that you've actually been playing
Mm,
off of. Um, you know, the one benefit of obviously playing with rules as written is that if you come across a conflict of rules and you're not sure, well, how does this rule work with that rule? Well, you can just go online and find out, right? Whereas if you start then adding too many house rules, or you can't find out, you know, then it's ultimately more stress on the DM to figure out what the ruling is, and then potentially get into a debate with players.
mm,
Um, so it's just you got to be really careful because you can push it too far, and you almost lose that core essence of your rule set and the system that you're playing. At that point, you might as well just play something else.
absolutely. With every house rule, there needs to be boundaries
Mm,
and expectations we have with our players. So, how would you go about setting up a house rule?
yeah, the most important thing with it is clarity and buy-in. So you need to be very upfront and honest about what the rule is and
Mm,
why it's in place. And this even more so if it's something that negatively impacts your players. So, for example, one of the rules that I've got in is negative HP, which
mhm,
has no real benefit. It's just something that I want to put in because it makes sense to me, but it actually negatively impacts the players. But I explained why I'm doing it, and obviously the players were agreed to it. But they might not have. You know, they might have just said, "No, I don't like that. I don't want to play in a game with that kind of rule." At which point,
mm,
then, even as a DM, you can be overruled if all your players or the majority of your players don't want it. You're gonna have to take it out, no matter how much you know, because fun
mm,
is the most important thing at the end of the day. Um,
absolutely.
so yeah, you have to be upfront with it. Now, obviously, if it's a secret thing in the background, as long as it's not directly, you know, affecting your players, then it's fine. Um, but yeah, generally you need to be upfront. It needs to be written down. So you know, it
So,
doesn't have to be. It doesn't. You don't have to suddenly be a Wizards of the Coast, you know, writer. It doesn't have to be crazy paragraphs. It can even just be bullet points of what it is. But you know, have those written down and share that with the relevant players, whether it's all of them or if you've got like a specific one with a specific person, then send it to them. Obviously,
mhm,
you know, chat apps like Discord and things like that have a way of, you know, you can pin messages, so it's a
mm,
quick way to do that. WhatsApp, you can star messages, so you know there's ways of keeping it. Or if, you know, failing all of that, you can just make a document online like a Google Doc, put it all on there. Um, that you can both see, so then you can, you know, just have a place where you're both looking at the same thing, and that's the important
mhm,
part. If you have your version of the notes and they have their version of the notes, that's where that issue comes in.
absolutely.
And the other thing to always remember is on that is that obviously rules work both ways, you
Mhm,
know, and you know, you may make up a rule, the players might go, well, I actually think it should work this way, you know, so they've got to be happy with it, you've got to be happy with it. Usually you might end up with a compromise in the middle that everyone's happy with,
mhm,
but yeah, it has to work both ways.
yeah, yeah. Checking understanding is vital,
Mm.
and then as further on to the both ways component is that anything that works for your players works against your players as well.
Yes.
So like crit rules, as we all love having many different custom crit rules.
Hmm.
If you can hit crit your enemies this way, then your enemies should be able to crit you this way,
Yeah,
and that all comes with that same equivalency understanding.
100%, definitely. Um, and you know, once you've got your, you know, your rules in place and you've agreed on something, it then does become both, you know, everybody's responsibility to
Mm,
remember and enforce them. You know, you can't pick and choose when you've started to apply something, because you know the DM especially has a lot they have to remember. You know, and if
absolutely.
it's something that the DM also has to now subsequently track, that's extra effort on them. So you know, you got to help you as players. They should help them out. Try to, at least. You know, if they've forgotten something, you know, pick back up on it, even if it is unfortunately a negative thing. And subsequently, obviously, you know, if the DM is tracking something, and there is like a progress meter, you know, like a little download meter, you know, if there's something in there in the background, then the DM should really tell the players that it's there. Now, depending on the very nature of it, that can be, out of session, or you can actually do it in session in an interesting way. Like for example, when I did this for your elemental weapons in the
Mhm.
first campaign, that I never said that there was a progress meter on it. So basically, the more you used it, the better it got. And it unlocked stuff that was quite cool. But I never said that there was anything doing that was doing it. But as you used it, I would say, "Oh, it's changed.
Mhm.
It's evolving somehow." So it's giving an in character description of, oh, actually, there is a progress meter here.
And you're within that as well. You're building your player engagement
Mm,
with that custom rule, with that house rule a little bit. You're able to, because at the end of the day, if no one's engaging in your rule, what's the point in having it?
yeah, yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, which goes, yeah, just all it does is end up proving that maybe it wasn't a good idea in the first place.
Hmm.
Um, but sort of on the back of that as well, like if you do find that players are not engaging with something, or they maybe are engaging with it in maybe not the way you thought that they would be, don't be afraid to make changes on the fly with your rules. Obviously, if you're going to make changes, they still have to agree to them. But because sometimes you'll make something and it makes total sense on paper,
Hmm.
but then in practice, it's like it could be more powerful than it should be, maybe not as powerful as it should be, because no one's engaging with it, so it's not worth having. So yeah, you can make changes, between sessions and until find something that works, because it's better to tweak something so it is fun than to just get rid of it. You know,
Certainly.
sometimes though, it just can't be salvaged. You've tried to tweak it, didn't work. It's just there's nothing you can get out of it. And
Hmm.
if that is the case, then sometimes you just have to get rid of that rule completely. Don't get too hung up on having an in-world reason for why a rule has changed. Um, if say for example you just let someone throw their sword like a boomerang, you got some Goliath or something bent a sword and threw it, you know,
Hmm.
and it was fine, and you thought, well, actually that's completely broken because it attacked everything. Um, you can just say, well, they just don't do it anymore, and all the players just kind of agree. We just move on. Don't talk about it. You can
Yeah.
joke about it, obviously, but just don't talk about it. Just move on with it. Don't you know? Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
don't get
They may
stuck.
shed a tear. They may shed a tear that they used to throw at a boomerang,
Yeah,
but they still can't do it anymore. Fun. It works both ways. That's has to
100%.
make, if it spoils the integrity of the game,
Mm.
then or if players are abusing it as well, to be
Yes.
fair. So
Yeah.
as all players love um a rule that works too well for them, or trying to find, many we all know a rules lawyer who
Mm.
loves to find the very edge cases of a rule that make it work best for
Oh
them,
yes.
and pa- patching up those rules so again, amendments can be made to best suit the rule as intended.
Mhm.
We all love rules.
Mhm.
We all love adding in-house rules, and so it's probably only fair that we actually talk about give some more in-depth examples of our house rules that
Mm.
either we've implemented or we've seen online that are worth talking about.
Yeah. I mean, there are probably some house rules out there that people are probably using and not realizing they're actually just house
Mhm.
rules. Where, um, like for example, in D&D, you're supposed to track things like food, drink, even how many arrows are in your quiver. Um, but like a lot of the DMs I've spoken to, they just like, even if they implemented it to begin with, they just thought, you know what, wasn't worth it, because that can just be a simple thing where you're just making it so you have less to do. Um,
Mhm.
but again, you can just make some house rules that are completely superficial, like having tieflings that aren't just pink and red. You've got some that are green. You've got some that are yellow. Just why not? Because maybe you've got I don't know, a squad of tieflings that are all the colors of the rainbow.
Mhm.
Why not? Because you can. Or maybe you just decide that all your female dwarves have beards too,
Mhm.
because maybe it's
Or
because it's really cold in those mountains. They've evolved to needing beards.
yeah,
Why not?
or or even Dragonborns have tails.
Yes,
That's an aesthetic one as well.
yes, yeah, exactly. Um, But then obviously you've got those, and then you've got, ranging to the other end where you've got almost like game defining mechanics changes. Um,
Mm-hmm.
for example, resting rules. Um, so like in Pirates, we had the resting rules where you had to rest on the boat for a week before you could get a long rest. Um, and that's kind of one of the ways you can change it. Whether it's the length of time you need to
Mm-hmm.
rest in order to long rest, or maybe it's even location based or situation based. So, for example, in trackers, we've got a rule where you can't long rest in the wild because it's just too dangerous. You are constantly on edge and constantly under threat. Or maybe you have a situation where you've got a place and it's just heavy rain, and so it's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
unless you find shelter or make shelter, you're not going to be able to long rest here. So you can make it just again a little bit more interesting, because even if it's situational, so it's not happening all the time, but only sometimes, that's still a form of house rules. You're still
Mm-hmm.
changing it. It doesn't have to be every time. You can even, if you've got like a setting where you've got different environment types, you could maybe change the rules for each environment type potentially.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
True. Into combat as well, there's many classic examples of house rules for combat. One of my personal favorites is max crit rule, a maximum crit damage rule where you take your base roll and then you take the maximum your dice would have rolled. So say if you're 3d6, that's 18 plus your rolled 3d6 gives you that extra tier of damage
mm,
that actually feels like a critical hit. But
yeah.
for trackers, that would not have worked for us, no doubt.
No, because we did talk about it before the campaign started, because we had the three potential options for crits.
Hmm.
We had the runs as standard where you roll the dice twice, but there's always a downside because you can roll 4d6 but
Yeah,
only still get 12, or
yeah.
and it doesn't really feel like it. Or you can, like I said, do the max crit damage, or you can just roll your damage and then times it by two. And I
Hmm.
think everyone wanted to do the max crit damage,
They
because
did.
they had it from other campaigns, because we had it in
It's a
Pirates
juicy one.
and we had it in Ascendance. But because I pointed out that obviously if you get max crit rules, the enemy gets max crit rules,
Hmm.
and considering how strong I've made some of those creatures, if they crit you, you'd probably just die, like
Yeah,
outright die, because they hit hard. So, and then obviously the players are like, nope, I let's go back to normal rules.
yeah. That's not quite worth the risk.
No, no, exactly, and that also builds on to, like, obviously things hitting you so hard that it brings me to like a house rule that again I've implemented, that's not really to the benefit of the players as such. It's actually a negative
Mm.
thing for the players, which is negative HP, which is because one of the things that's always bothered me is if you get hit for by a boulder, or you get hit bitten by a mosquito, you're only 1 HP away from being fine. And
Hmm.
that makes no sense to me. So I've implemented a thing where if you get hit, you go into negative HP. So you have to get healed past that to be fine again. If you've taken
Hmm.
35 damage, you know, in you and you're making negative 35, they're going to have to heal you 36 to get you back up again.
Absolutely. And then on top of that, you've got some of the more class-based house rules you can have. So some very classic ones for multi-classing you can have where if your fighter might need to actually go to wizard school to multi-class into a wizard, or they have to actually go to bard college to actually get those levels up in bard.
Mm.
um, or even you could ignore the minimum requirements to multi-class because it just makes too much thematic sense for the character, even though they're like one or two stats off being able to multi-class.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You don't want them wasting necessarily feats just to
Hmm.
just to push them over the edge. Definitely. Um, it's funny. Funny you mentioned multi-classing, because it reminds me of something I did in the first campaign where a player wanted to multi-class into warlock,
Mm.
and so, and to be fair, they decided on the person they were going to make a pact with, and it was just happened to be an evil deity. and they would obviously, their that whole character's whole thing was were getting revenge because someone killed their loved one. And what I did, and again, it was a house rule that I put in, was I wanted to make it more spicy.
Mm,
So what I did was basically, they did the pact, which had its own grim requirements. Um, was that every time they took a level of warlock, the deity would steal a memory of the loved one that they were getting revenge for,
mm.
which was so lovely. I loved it as a DM. I don't think the player, I think the player enjoyed it somewhat as well.
Sadistic. I think it's a
Yeah,
sadistic love.
yeah, definitely. But it was interesting because again, it's like I think a lot of people just do multi-classing on autopilot. So
Hmm.
this and obviously what you were talking about of making a conscious effort of actually unlocking it, um, it made it so that there was stakes to it. Like it got to it, and it definitely got to a point when after they took a few where they were
Mm.
like, "Oh man, I do want more warlock power, but is it what am I going to lose?" Because the memory loss
Yeah,
got more severe as the levels went higher. So I think actually near the end they started taking ranger levels again.
I did.
But again, it's just like it's a house rule that just adds weight and impact to something that's otherwise very mundane.
Hmm. I mean, th- we've got some very heartfelt, heavy-hitting house rules. You can also find some very chaotic house rules on the internet. Um, one I've seen, I've never implemented it myself, but I've seen is that you use your D20, your dice set, as your stat generation. So your D20, the two D10s, the D6, the D8, the D4. So your six all become, you basically roll each one and you pick the result as one of your stats. So you could get a nat 20,
Yeah,
and then but at best for one of your stats is going to be four,
that's brutal.
which
Someone
can
is
be
very
brutal.
uncharismatic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, that's great. I mean, the thing is, with it being a D20 as well, because obviously you just could roll a two, and
Yeah,
that's suddenly your highest possible
absolutely.
number gone. Wow,
Hmm.
that's madness. That is okay.
Brutal,
Yeah, that's very
but
brutal.
very entertaining, as you
Oh
might
yeah,
imagine.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
I mean, if
Perfect
you
for a
might
one
be a
shot, that's for
generous,
sure.
absolutely, you might be very generous DM and say, actually, okay, if it's ones, you could re-roll once. That's
Yes.
another classic one, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I've had a DM that did that, which was very nice. Because yeah,
Mm,
because obviously the standard is 4d6, and if two of those are ones, no one wants a commoner as their character,
yeah.
you know. But yeah, talking about sort of doing roles and stuff is like one of the ones I implemented was again in the first campaign. One of the characters was both taking a copious amount of alcohol and drugs,
Hmm.
and I saw an opportunity here to again make it a bit more interesting because again I think a lot of what people do is they'll go, okay, I spend the night drinking, uh, and then what ends up happening is they just fade to black, wake up again, probably maybe with a hangover or whatever, or
Yeah,
maybe roll a constitution save to see if you
yeah,
throw
yeah.
up or something, but that's like it. And what I decided to do was I made a what I called this my side effects table. Now, granted, I made 100 things in this, but obviously you don't need to go that far. Which had sort of positive, negative, and neutral outcomes in it. And so basically, what would happen is if I felt someone had drank enough to push them over the edge,
Hmm.
past being tipsy, is that they would roll against it, and then something would happen. And that could be something completely different, like you see everyone as the opposite gender to what they are, or um, suddenly you get advantage on charisma for persuasion
Hmm.
checks because you've actually just become more endearing. Um,
Hmm.
or everyone you speak to, you think that they when every time they speak, bubbles comes out. Something
Yeah,
ridiculous. Just really
yeah,
fun little things to just make it a little bit more interesting, and even like
yeah.
maybe even drive someone's like RP of how they're spending the night.
Absolutely.
Um,
Maybe they maybe they can only speak Draconic, but they don't know Draconic, so they end
they
up just
think,
speaking gibberish.
yeah, yeah. I think that was one on there actually. They would try they would spoke Orcish, but instead of speaking Orcish, they just spoke in a really low growly voice and pretended they were speaking in Orcish. Just something like that.
Yeah.
It's quite good fun. And obviously you can just, it's a good opportunity to just throw all these little crazy creative ideas you've got out
Mm.
there. Just, another ones I did was, what I sort of talked about earlier was, weapons. So,
Hmm.
we had elemental blades in the first campaign that, as you use them, it unlocks something. So again, that was quite interesting because normally you've got certain subclasses that form bonds with their weapons, like the Eldritch Knight or some
Mm,
of the Warlock ones. But this kind of meant that everybody got something that was sort of bonded to them and sort of a bit more personal, which was was quite nice. And obviously, as those unlocked, they did something more personal to that person to make them more
mm,
awesome. Actually, reward their efforts, essentially. So that's always like a nice thing. And it doesn't have to be a weapon; it could be anything really.
yeah.
It could be, maybe you've got like an idol that if it's drenched in blood, once it's had the blood of 1,000 enemies, 100 enemies, or something, it does something. Gives
Mm,
you a boon, for example. Stuff like that.
yeah.
Is that it's something quite you can track, or something that something that players can then have some attachment to because they're
Mm.
building something up.
And even going down to the very mundane, I guess more of a mundane level, you can anything that a character does regularly can also be considered a house rule. So
Mm,
from when everyone goes to sleep, you take your armor off, your holy amulet goes under your pillow, and your cat sleeps on your chest. They're all character habits that you can assume you always do every time, or they always set traps around their campsite.
mm,
That if someone was to attack, you've now got a list of things that you can, if they've watched the players for a long time, the enemies can work against, or if that's the first time, again, works against your enemies because the players have prepped and enhanced, and you've got that list of things to work against. To say, or if they're all of a sudden saying, "Oh, I should have my armor on because I'm in combat now," it's like, no, we agreed. These are the list of things that we always did every
yeah.
night.
Yeah, especially considering how long it takes to put some armor on. I mean,
Hmm.
some armor takes 10 minutes to put on,
Yeah.
So yeah, if you get ambushed at night, your paladin suddenly is not as strong as they used to be.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's very important to um to have that. And you can almost take it one step further in a sense to say that, your character carries a lot of stuff, right? And
Mm.
while there is encumbrance, there's no like space encumbrance as such, on character sheets. If your character wants to hold, 12 quarterstaffs, carry capacity wise, they can. But like
Hmm.
logistically, how would you do that?
Yeah.
And it's just, they may, maybe there is an element of like, again, almost house rules in the sense that just having an agreement of where you've got stuff. If you're
Mm.
you've got short swords on your side, you've got a glaive on your back, your shield is on sort of on top of that, and then that's fine. You've got that understanding. You've got a money pouch to your left, your side.
Mm.
It's mostly making sure that people don't go crazy with it because, it's an action to take something out of your bag.
Yeah.
So the way to get around that is to have it always on your side, but you can't just have a row down your leg of short swords. That's not going to happen. So there's like just to make sure people don't go too far with it.
Hmm.
But also like if you're planning on having someone steal from them during the day, like a pickpocket or whatever, it's always good to just know
Hmm.
where everything is. Because if they never have, because you last thing you want to do is, oh, this kid pushed past you, stole you, oh, some of your money's gone, and then the player goes, but how? None of my
Hmm.
money is on me. It's in my bag, in my backpack. They
Yeah.
can't have done. And then suddenly you've got a wreck on it, and then now it's not a surprise anymore.
Yeah.
But even that's a form of house rules because by rules by written doesn't account for any of that.
Absolutely. Now, I think that's all we're going to have time for today. But I mean, between the two of us, I think we could just talk on forever, essentially, about different house rules and potentially even come up with even more as we go.
Yeah, we don't want
So
to give me more ideas for trackers.
absolutely not. So thank you so much for your time today,
All right, no worries.
and I think you might see us next time talking about other things, maybe um, about a boss, maybe about the rule of cool. Who knows? But at the end of the day, we need to make sure that if you're in doubt, just make it up.